If you've been preparing bodies long enough, you develop an instinct. You just know when something is wrong. The face tells a story. The hands, they reveal the final moments. And the muscles, they contract in very specific ways depending on how death came. For 8 years, I believed I was honoring the dead, that my profession was sacred, that every body that passed through my hands received the care, the dignity it deserved. But then I discovered something I couldn't have imagined. I was being used as an accomplice in a serial murder operation, one that had lasted for decades. And the worst part, I was the perfect candidate for the role, meticulous, dedicated, reliable, and completely blind to the truth that was staring me in the face. My name is Silas Blackthorne. For 8 years, I was the funeral director at Gravemont Memorial Home in Duskford, a small town where everyone knows everyone, where secrets are currency. A town where I discovered that no one, absolutely no one, actually died of natural causes. And it took me years to realize it. What I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. When I shared this story with police, journalists, psychologists, even prosecutors, many of them said I was having a nervous breakdown, that working with the dead for so long had eroded my sanity, that I was seeing conspiracies where there were only unfortunate coincidences. Some suggested intensive therapy, others just walked away, unwilling to hear what they considered the delusions of a man who had spent too much time alone with corpses. But I know what I saw. I know what I discovered during those terrifying last weeks at Gravemont Memorial Home. And if you stay with me until the end of this story, you'll understand why a respected funeral home, run by a mentor I loved like a father, became the largest hideout for serial killers this region has ever known. You'll see how seemingly upright people can orchestrate deaths for years, without raising a single suspicion. And you'll discover how I, unknowingly, became a crucial part of this machine of death. But before we get there, you need to understand who I was before I discovered the truth. You need to meet Edgar Crane, the man who taught me everything about dignity in death, while secretly orchestrating murders. And you need to see Duskford through my innocent eyes. Before I realized I was living in a town controlled by psychopaths. Let's go back to the beginning. 2015. I had just graduated from Ashford Mortuary School, at the top of my class. I was 27 years old, full of ideals about serving families in their darkest moments. I truly believed I had found my calling. Gravemont Memorial Home was exactly the kind of place I had dreamed of working. A majestic Victorian mansion built in 1890, converted into a funeral home in the 1960s. It sat on the outskirts of Duskford, a town of 8,000 people, where almost everyone knows everyone else's business. The building itself was imposing, 3 floors of dark red brick, tall windows with stained glass, a porch running the entire front facade, surrounded by centuries-old oaks, casting dancing shadows in the daytime and ominous silhouettes at night. To me, it represented tradition, respect, solemnity. And then there was Edgar Crane, the owner of the funeral home for 30 years. A 61-year-old man, perfectly groomed gray hair, always wearing impeccable, sober-colored suits. He had a presence that commanded instant respect. When he spoke, his voice carried a natural authority, mixed with genuine compassion. I remember our first conversation, the day of my interview. I was nervous, eager to make a good impression. Edgar welcomed me into his office, a room lined with dark wood, shelves filled with books on anatomy and the psychology of grief. Diplomas and certificates covered an entire wall. "Silas," he said, leaning back in the leather chair behind the antique desk, "tell me one thing. Why did you choose this profession? And don't give me a rehearsed answer about helping people. I want to know what really motivated you to work with the dead." I told him the truth, that I had lost my grandfather when I was 10, and the funeral director in charge treated our family with such dignity and care. It had left a mark on me forever, that I saw our profession as an art, turning the tragedy of death into a celebration of a life lived. Edgar smiled, not a condescending smile, but one of genuine understanding. "Exactly," he said. "We're not just preparing bodies, Silas. We're preserving dignity. We're providing closure. We're helping families say goodbye in a healthy way. Never forget, what we do here matters more than most people realize." He hired me that very day, not just as an assistant director, but practically as a professional son. Edgar taught me far more than embalming techniques or funeral regulations. He educated me on the psychology of grief, on reading the emotional needs of families shattered by loss, on the sacred responsibility of caring for those who could no longer speak for themselves. And I absorbed every word as if it were gospel. I moved into the small apartment above the funeral home, modest but comfortable, with a view of the municipal cemetery, available 24/7 for emergency calls, constantly studying anatomy, preservation chemistry, grief counseling, state regulations. My social life almost disappeared. College friends stopped inviting me out because I was always working or studying. Romantic relationships died quickly because most people felt uneasy about what I did for a living. But I didn't care. I had found my purpose. When people asked what I did, I didn't just say funeral director. I explained that I was a guardian of final dignity, a professional ensuring that death was met with grace, not indifference. It sounds pretentious now, but back then, it felt like the most important thing in the world. For 7.5 years, I lived in that bubble of purpose and meaning. I genuinely believed I was making a difference, that every family I helped navigate the loss of a loved one left a little more healed because of my care and professionalism. It was exactly that sense of purpose, that obsessive dedication to my work, that made what I discovered later utterly devastating. Because when you blindly trust the right people, when you idealize your mentors, when your identity is entirely tied to your profession, finding out it was all an elaborate lie can destroy not only your career, but your soul. And it all began with a phone call on a rainy September night. A call that, on the surface, seemed perfectly routine. Another natural death of an elderly woman. Another grieving family needing our services. Another standard procedure I had performed hundreds of times before. But this time, when the body arrived at the funeral home the next morning, I realized there was something fundamentally wrong. Not just with that particular death, but potentially with many others I had treated as natural over the years. Before I tell you how it all began, you need to understand where it ended. You need to picture the scene that still haunts me to this day. Edgar Crane, the man I revered as a mentor, as a father figure, being handcuffed by federal agents on charges of conspiracy to commit murder. Dr. Seraphine Mathieu, the respected county coroner I had consulted religiously on every complex case, escorted into a police car while reporters shouted questions about how she had falsified hundreds of death certificates over 25 years. Detective Gordon Vince, a man I once considered a pillar of the community, sitting in an interrogation room, confessing his role in a web of corruption that reached into nearly every institution in Duskford. But let's go back to that rainy night in September 2023. It was about 10:30 p.m. when the phone rang. I was in my apartment reviewing a manual on advanced facial restoration techniques when I heard the familiar sound of an emergency call. Gravemont Memorial Home, Silas Blackthorne speaking. How may I help you? My voice, automatic, professional, reassuring, trained over the years to convey competence and compassion, even in the middle of the night. On the other end, a woman in her 50s, clearly in shock. Mr. Blackthorne, my name is Evelyn Bites. My mother, Helena Bites, passed away tonight. She died in her sleep, peacefully, but I don't know what to do now. I spent the next 20 minutes on the phone with Evelyn, guiding her through the initial steps, explaining transportation of the body, preparation options, funeral planning. It was a conversation I had had thousands of times before, following an internal script designed to steady grieving families lost in sudden loss. But something in Evelyn's voice unsettled me. It wasn't just grief. That much was expected. There was an underlying tension, a restlessness that suggested something beyond normal mourning. When I asked about the circumstances of her mother's death, she hesitated. She seemed agitated in the last few days, Evelyn finally said. She wasn't sleeping well. She seemed worried about something, but she wouldn't tell me what. She just said it was old people's problems, nothing I should worry about. A long pause. Maybe it was premonition. Some people know when death is coming, don't they? I agreed, offered words of comfort, scheduled transport for the next morning. It seemed like the very definition of routine, a natural death, a grieving but functional family, a straightforward procedure that would allow me to honor Helena's memory while helping the living process their loss. Helena Bites arrived at the funeral home at 9 a.m. the next morning. Our regular transport team, 2 men who had worked with us for years, handled it. They reported nothing unusual, an elderly woman who appeared to have passed peacefully in her sleep. But when I pulled back the sheet in the preparation room and saw the body for the first time, I knew immediately something was terribly wrong. Helena Bites did not look like someone who had died peacefully. Her face was twisted, frozen in an expression of absolute terror, not the calm serenity of natural death in sleep, not even the muscular contraction of a heart attack. It was the kind of terror you only see when someone realizes they're about to die and fights desperately against it. Her hands were clenched into fists so tight her nails had pierced her palms, leaving marks of dried blood. Her arms were drawn defensively across her chest, as if she tried to protect herself from an attacker. And most disturbing of all, there were faint but unmistakable bruises around her throat. Marks that, to a trained eye, suggested external pressure, not the kind of discoloration that sometimes appears naturally after death, but the specific pattern left by human fingers pressing against the trachea. I stood frozen in that preparation room for minutes, trying to reconcile what I was seeing with the official cause of death: cardiac arrest. Completely normal for an 83-year-old. But the physical evidence told a different story. For the first time in my career, I questioned not just a death certificate, but my own professional judgment. Was I seeing things that weren't there? Had years of working with death finally begun to warp my perception of reality? Or was I the only one willing to see what others had chosen to ignore, for reasons I didn't yet understand? I decided to call Dr. Seraphine Mathieu, the county coroner who had signed Helena's death certificate. Dr. Mathieu was someone I deeply respected. 15 years of experience, impeccable reputation, known for her thoroughness and scientific integrity. "Dr. Mathieu," I said when she answered, "I'm calling about Helena Bites. I have some concerns about the physical presentation of the body that I'd like to discuss. I've observed a few inconsistencies that might be relevant to determining cause of death." There was a long silence, and when she finally spoke, her voice carried a coldness I had never heard from her before. "Mr. Blackthorne, I've completed my examination and filed my report. Mrs. Bites died of natural causes, age-related cardiac arrest. I'm not sure what concerns you think you have, but I can assure you my findings are accurate and final." I tried to explain what I had seen, the terror in her face, the defensive positioning of her arms, the bruising around her throat. But Dr. Mathieu cut me off, abruptly, dismissively, in a way that felt completely out of character. "Mr. Blackthorne, I think you may be overcomplicating this. Bodies can present in unusual ways after death, especially in elderly patients with multiple conditions. What you're describing is well within the range of normal post-mortem changes. I strongly suggest you proceed with the preparation as usual and avoid unnecessary speculation." I hung up the phone feeling more disturbed than reassured. Her dismissive, almost hostile tone didn't match the professional I had worked with for years. In questionable cases, she had always welcomed discussion. She had always been open to clarification. But not this time. That night, as I prepared Helena's body for viewing, the atmosphere in the prep room grew oppressive. There's no better word for it. The air felt thicker, colder, charged with a tension that had nothing to do with the building's climate system. The fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own. Normally, I'd blame old wiring, a power surge. But that night, it felt intentional. And then, I heard it, a whisper, so faint it almost blended into the constant hum of the ventilation system, but still unmistakable. It sounded like a woman's voice, urgent, desperate, as if someone was trying to communicate something of vital importance. I froze, listening, but the sound stopped. I told myself it was just the building settling. Gravemont Memorial Home was over 130 years old. Old buildings make noise, wind through the vents, wood expanding and contracting with temperature shifts. But when I resumed my work, I heard it again. Clearer this time, though still impossible to make out words. The tone was unmistakable, urgent, pleading, as if someone was trying to warn me of something I couldn't yet see. I finished the preparation as quickly as possible, locked the room behind me with trembling hands, and climbed the stairs to my apartment. All the while, trying to rationalize what had happened. The sounds could have been anything. The feeling of being watched. Probably just my mind processing doubts about Helena's death. But that night, I lay awake until nearly dawn, thinking about Helena's expression of terror, about Dr. Mathieu's evasive response, about the strange atmosphere in the prep room. For the first time since I had started at Gravemont Memorial Home, I felt surrounded by secrets I could not comprehend. What I didn't know then was that Helena Bites had uncovered something that would cost her life. that she had been investigating financial irregularities stretching into the highest levels of local power, and that her death was only the first in a series that would force me to confront a terrifying truth about the community I once called home. To truly understand what happened to Helena Bites, you need to know some technical aspects of how death actually presents itself in a body. And for that, I'll share what experts later taught me after this case came to light. Dr. Cassandra Scher, a forensic pathologist with the FBI and over 20 years of homicide experience, was one of the specialists who reviewed my documentation. And she told me something that completely changed the way I began to see those signs. Silas, she explained, in cases of asphyxiation or strangulation, the body shows very specific defensive signs, and they're almost impossible to fake. She listed them: bruises on the fingertips when the victim tries to remove the hands or object, cutting off their breath; petechiae, tiny red spots in the eyes caused by intracranial pressure; and muscle contractions that lock the body in defensive positions. All of those signs were present in Helena Bites' body. But there was something even more revealing, something I only learned to recognize later: the exact pattern of bruising around the neck. Dr. Scher showed me comparative photographs. "Look here," she said. "When someone is manually strangled, the marks of the fingers fall in very specific places. The thumb on one side, the other four fingers on the opposite side. The pressure concentrated exactly where the joints press down." But here's something almost nobody knows about the system. Small funeral homes, like Gravemont Memorial, depend entirely on their relationship with local coroners. If you question the official cause of death too much, you risk losing contracts. You risk being cut out of medical referrals. And eventually, you watch your business collapse. Dr. Robert Collins, a former funeral director who testified in similar cases, explained it to me like this: "Silas, there's an unofficial hierarchy. In small counties, coroners hold almost absolute power. Police trust them, doctors trust them, families trust them, and funeral directors, well, we're just the technicians who carry out the orders." And that hierarchy was exactly what made the system perfect for covering up murders. After all, who's going to question a coroner with an impeccable reputation? Who's going to doubt a respected funeral director with decades in the community? FBI agent Laura Bennett, a specialist in rural corruption, showed me something even more disturbing. She told me, "Silas, in small towns where the same people control government, police, the medical system, even the local media, corruption can run for decades without anyone noticing." And she showed me reports that turned my stomach. At least 12 other small towns across 3 states showed the same patterns: strange mortality rates, clusters of life insurance policies, suspicious turnover in public offices, and always, a local funeral home at the center of the operation. Dr. Scher also taught me how death certificates can be manipulated. The primary cause of death is often listed as something vague: cardiac arrest or multi-organ failure. Technically accurate, since that's how all deaths ultimately happen, but completely useless in determining homicide. Agent Bennett added, "The perpetrators choose their victims carefully. Elderly people with fragile health histories, people who are socially isolated, or those who discovered things they shouldn't, but who could easily be painted as paranoid." And there was another disturbing pattern. According to Dr. Scher, the victims in Duxford weren't chosen at random. Each one had access to confidential financial information. Helena Bites, for instance, served as a volunteer treasurer in several organizations. John Lawson, another case, was an accountant for multiple local businesses. Dr. Collins also explained the techniques. Manual strangulation leaves evidence. But if you know what you're doing, you can minimize the marks. By applying pressure in very specific points, you can cause asphyxiation without obvious bruising. And if the coroner is cooperative, even clear evidence can be dismissed as normal post-mortem variation. Then came the analysis from Dr. Natalie Brooks, a criminal psychologist who studied the case. She said the most shocking thing was that these operations don't recruit incompetent people. They recruit the best. Silas wasn't chosen in spite of his integrity, she told me. You were chosen because of it. A meticulous, respected funeral director who documents everything perfectly. That's the ideal cover. She explained that Edgar Crane didn't hire me by chance. He needed someone who would do excellent work, who would earn families' trust, who would never miss a detail, but who would also remain loyal to local authorities. Later, Agent Bennett showed me the full timeline of the operation. Based on insurance records and mortality patterns, they estimated it had been running for at least 12 years, possibly more. That meant dozens of people could have been murdered during that time. And the question that haunted me was this: how many bodies had I prepared over the years without realizing they were homicide victims? How many families had I comforted while the killers walked free in the community? Dr. Scher told me something that forever changed the way I approached my work. Most funeral directors never learn to recognize signs of homicide. It's not part of the training. You're taught to prepare bodies, not investigate deaths. But once you know what to look for, the signs become unmistakable. And then Agent Bennett revealed the financial side of it all. They weren't just killing people to silence them. It was also a money-making scheme. Life insurance policies taken out in secret on vulnerable seniors. Beneficiaries switched to entities controlled by the conspirators. A multi-layered operation generating millions over the years. Remember when I mentioned the unease in Evelyn's voice? When she called me about her mother Helena's death? Well, when she came to the funeral home the next day for the service, I realized my intuition had been absolutely correct. And what she revealed would change everything. Evelyn Bites arrived an hour early, a refined woman, 42 years old, clearly devastated by her loss. But there was something else in her expression, a strange mix of confusion, anger, and something I can only describe as barely concealed terror. "Mr. Blackthorne," she said, as I guided her into the viewing room, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. When you prepared my mother's body, did you notice anything unusual, anything that seemed wrong?" As a funeral director, I had obligations. I was supposed to keep certain observations to myself, but as a human being, I knew Evelyn deserved the truth, and my instincts told me she already suspected something. "What do you mean by unusual?" I asked carefully. Evelyn looked around the room as if afraid someone might be listening. Then she leaned closer. Her voice dropped to an almost whisper. "My mother called me 3 days before she died. She was terrified, Mr. Blackthorne, genuinely terrified. She said she had discovered something that could cost her life if the wrong people found out." A chill ran across my skin as Evelyn continued. She was handling the finances for several community organizations, the library board, the historical society, the community center. As treasurer, she had access to the books, and she started noticing things, discrepancies, money being moved in ways that made no sense, donations disappearing, contracts given to companies that didn't exist, life insurance policies taken out on people who didn't even know about them. Remember when I said at the very beginning that no one in Duxford died of natural causes? Evelyn was about to confirm that in the most terrifying way. She documented everything, Mr. Blackthorne. Names, dates, amounts. She planned to take it all to the state auditor on Monday, but she died on Friday night, peacefully, in her sleep. In that moment, staring into Evelyn's eyes, I knew I had a choice. I could keep my observations to myself, follow protocol, or I could trust my instincts and share what I had seen. Evelyn, I said carefully, I did notice some things about your mother's body that didn't fit with a natural death in her sleep. But I need to be cautious. I may be misinterpreting what I observed. I told her about the look of terror on Helena's face, the defensive position of her hands, the bruising around her throat. As I spoke, Evelyn's face went pale. My words confirmed her worst fears. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who can we even turn to if the coroner herself won't listen? If the people meant to investigate might be the ones involved?" Remember when I mentioned Dr. Matthew and her strange reaction when I called? At that moment, I began connecting dots I should have seen much earlier. "Evelyn," I said, "give me a few days to investigate quietly. But don't share your mother's findings with anyone. If she was killed for what she discovered, you may be in danger too." That night, after Evelyn left, I returned to the preparation room, and the strange phenomena I had felt before, the icy temperature, the whispers, the sensation of being watched, returned with force. This time, the whispers were clearer. I still couldn't make out words, but the tone was urgent, as if Helena herself was trying to warn me, guiding me toward the truth she died trying to expose. That was the moment I made a decision. I would not wait for official channels. I would conduct my own investigation into the financial irregularities Helena had uncovered. And remember when I said we would eventually discover that this network extended beyond Duxford? That's exactly what I began to find when I dug into public records. I mapped financial ties between businesses, civic groups, government offices, and a disturbing pattern emerged. The same names appeared again and again. Judge Harrison Webb on the boards of multiple charities. Detective Gordon Vince, married to an accountant tied to several local firms. Dr. Seraphine Mathieu, consulting for insurance companies, while also serving as county coroner. Individually, nothing seemed suspicious. It was a small town. Prominent citizens often wore many hats, but taken together, with Helena's suspicions and the circumstances of her death, the pattern turned sinister. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became. Helena hadn't uncovered simple accounting errors. She had found evidence of a conspiracy involving some of the most powerful people in Duxford. But I still needed proof. Something strong enough to convince authorities outside the town's compromised power structure. And I was beginning to realize my investigation was placing me in the very same danger that had cost Helena her life. The proof I needed would come from an unexpected source, in a way that would forever change my understanding of what it truly means to care for the dead. And it would force me to confront a terrifying truth about the man I once considered my mentor, my father figure. 3 weeks after Helena Bites' death, I received a call that shattered any illusion I still had about the true nature of this town. It was 2 in the morning when the phone rang in my small apartment above the funeral home. "Mr. Blackthorne?" The voice was young, female, trembling. "My name is Julia Len. My brother John died tonight, and I don't know who else to call. The police say it was natural, but I know it wasn't. John Len, 45 years old, an accountant, trusted with the books of multiple local businesses and organizations, known for his precision, his integrity. The idea that he had suddenly died of natural causes, statistically, impossible. John called me yesterday," Julia continued, her voice breaking. "He was terrified. He said he had uncovered evidence of financial crimes involving very powerful people, and that they were going to kill him to keep him silent." A familiar chill ran down my spine, the same feeling I'd had when Evelyn told me about Helena. The same pattern, someone investigating financial irregularities, a sudden, natural death, a family that suspected the truth but was powerless to stop it. When John's body arrived the next morning, my worst fears were confirmed. Like Helena, his body told a story of terror and struggle, clenched fists, a frozen expression of agony, and clear, unmistakable ligature marks around his throat. But this time, I was ready. I photographed everything, documented every detail with the same meticulous precision John himself had used in his financial investigations. The measurements of the marks, the position of the body, every piece of evidence that contradicted the official cause of death. And then came the moment that destroyed everything I believed. The next morning, Edgar Crane arrived at the funeral home earlier than usual, and I saw it immediately. Something was different. The calm, composed mentor I had always known was gone. In his place, agitation, restlessness. "Silas," he said the moment he closed the office door, "I know you've been asking questions about some of our recent cases. You need to understand that this kind of speculation can be very damaging to our reputation and to the families we serve." That was the moment I realized Edgar knew. He knew about my investigation. He was being kept informed. The man I revered as a mentor had been watching my every move. "Don't play games with me, Silas," he said, his tone colder than I'd ever heard. "I know you've spoken with families about your so-called concerns. I know you've been questioning Dr. Matthews' professional judgment, and I know you've been digging into matters that are not your concern." Edgar stood, stepped closer. His expression grew darker with every step. "The people who run this town have been very patient with your curiosity, Silas. But patience has limits. If you continue asking questions, you will find yourself in a very dangerous position." And then he said something that froze me to my core. "You really think you got here by accident? You think I hired a funeral director, this dedicated, this meticulous, this trustworthy, without a very specific reason? For 8 years, Silas, you were the perfect accomplice. You prepared dozens of murder victims, believing they had died naturally. You comforted families while their killers walked free. You were exactly the kind of professional we needed to make the operation look legitimate. In that instant, my entire career collapsed. My professional identity was a lie. I had been used, a pawn in dozens of murders, and for a moment, I nearly broke. But Edgar made a mistake. He underestimated how much the truth meant to me. "Abandon this investigation, Silas," he said. "Go back to the work you were hired to do. If you can't, you'd better find another line of work, preferably in another town." What Edgar didn't know was that Julia Len had already secured her brother's evidence, complete documentation of the corruption network, and that I had already contacted federal authorities outside of Duxford. But here's the part that will send shivers down your spine. When I confronted Edgar with my findings, when I showed him the photographs, when I threatened to expose everything, he smiled, a cold, calculating smile. And in that moment, I realized I still hadn't grasped the full scale of the conspiracy. "Oh, Silas," he said, "do you really think it's just us? Do you think Duxford is the only place this happens?" Then he handed me a list. Other towns, other funeral homes, other directors who had been carefully selected for the same role. The network was national, and escaping Duxford would only be the beginning, because what I had uncovered was bigger than anything I could have imagined. So, how did I survive that night in the funeral home? How did the evidence reach the FBI? And how many other towns are hiding the same terrifying secrets? Those are stories for the next videos. If you're ready to see just how far this conspiracy really goes. Because the truth about Duxford was only the tip of the iceberg, and what we uncovered next will forever change the way you see small-town America.